So why Space Marines for Warhammer 40,000 will always be the best. This is something that we have to accept as a Warhammer 40K player. And on the Tactica side, what are you going to do about it? That's what we're going to explore. But we're going to begin with the secret sauce, the narrative of 40K. Yes, the models are fantastic, and the production quality of the models is fantastic. Even if we look back at some of the older sculpts that GW has put out over the years, they were ahead of their day back then, and they're still quite amazing with how they look. I mean, I have literally Eldar Viper kits and other Eldar model kits that, I don't know, they're like 15 years old, and they look really, really amazing still, and the newer kits are amazing. So from that visual, you can't dispute Games Workshop. The narrative, the IP, the grimdark, that's amazing. So this game has this duality of so much to explore and play in terms of the community, pulling in Space Marines. Space Marines are the cornerstone of that. Yes, we've got the Imperium. Yes, we've got Imperial Guard. Yes, we have the High Lords of Terra. I mean, I guess Xenos exists somewhere, but this focus of the Imperium and the struggle of mankind, the Immortal God Emperor, Space Marines are at the front of that. They are prominent in the lore. And I'm willing to bet, Games Workshop knows this, I'm willing to bet that you, listening to this right now, we should have like a sound off in the comments. I'm willing to bet that you play Space Marines. And I'm willing to bet if you're like, Fritz, I will never play Space Marines, or I play Tyranids, or I play Necrons exclusively. I'm willing to bet in 6 to 8 months from now, you will be playing Space Marines, because the allure is just so much, and the narrative so much. I mean, just look at all the different types of Space Marines to play. Games Workshop knows that Space Marines sell and Space Marines drive the game. What that means on the backside of the game is the majority of new rules and new releases are always going to be Space Marine focused, Space Marine centric. You might get a new kit here and there for some reason if you're Chaos or some of the other factions, but Space Marines are going to be driving the sales, because Games Workshop, despite what they say, they are a miniatures company. They are out to make money, and the secret sauce says Space Marines sell, and they've helped brew that sauce. That is where they're going. So not only are there going to be new releases over the years and over the editions, these releases are going to be overpowered, or in that moment, they're going to favor the meta. Now, the meta in 40K, we should make a note for new players. I'm going to make a note of what the meta is. The meta of any game, but especially with 40K, is where, if we think of rules are essentially a simulation. They're trying to simulate combat. They can't simulate everything, or I should say, they're trying to simulate the vision of combat in whatever game system. They can't simulate everything because you don't have a GM, a game master, or total open world. But there's this idea of stress points, and this is true of any system. We're just looking at 40K right now. These stress points are where the kind of rules slow down a little bit, or where you tend to bypass the structure of the rules because you're trying to emulate something. So if I have a Space Marine hero, and in the Black Library books and in the lore, that hero, that Primarch is overpowered, I need to have something that can supersede the base rules, special abilities, clickies, combos, whatever we want to call it, that represent it. Well, the problem is when you have the rules that are set at a certain level, but then you have these units that are above that, they influence the meta, which the meta means looking at the rules, what breaks the rules, what bypasses the rules, what's the best unit at the time. And we see this with competitive players where a lot of their armies, it's just, what's the minimum I need to take in the rules, and then spam out, rinse and repeat, copy and paste units that are best in the meta. True of any game system, but hyper-focused by 40K because Games Workshop does not balance its system, has no intention of balancing its system because it sells, forces you to buy new models, and by playing Space Marines and releasing Space Marines and pushing Space Marines, you're always going to have the best, you're always going to have the crazy combos, and it's challenging for other armies, other factions to catch up to this. Now, over the years, as they've introduced new phases of the game and rewritten the rules, there have been some power shifts. A lot of players look very fondly at 5th edition 40K because it was the apex of competitive play that favored vehicles. Games Workshop changed the damage chart at the time for vehicles, made them harder to destroy. This is before everything had kind of wounds and pushing that out. And the fact that Imperial Guard could spam out lots and lots of cheap vehicles meant Guard had a tremendous advantage with that. Likewise, Space Marines had somewhat of an advantage with Razorbacks because they were cheap. They gave you great firepower. So you saw this shift in vehicles, and because Imperial Guard could do that, I'm always going to call it Imperial Guard. I don't use these new names. Can't do that. That favored that aspect, but we saw that shift. Now that was numerous editions ago, and Games Workshop is hyper focused just on Marines. So it's something you have to accept. They're just always going to favor Marines. Now that's not fatalistic because I love playing Grey Knights. I love playing Black Templars. I've just proved that formula. But if you asked me, if you said, Fritz, what kind of player are you? I would say first that I'm an Eldar player. I would say that I'm a Necron player. I would say that I'm a Tyranid player. I would say I'm a Chaos player. Space Marines would be lower on the list. And I love Space Marines, but it's just these other factions have captured my imagination. So if you're playing non-Space Marines, this is the reality. Okay, what are we going to do about that? Now, I tend to be a narrative type player. And what I mean by narrative is I look at the models, I look at the powers that they have, and I want to do something cool on the tabletop. I want to try and win. I'm going to put my best game out there. But what's more important is creating something. If you and I are stepping out of space and time, we're stepping into the grimdark, we're going through the warp, I want to roll some dice, I want to blow some stuff up. I want you to remember my game, our game, years from now. Literally years ago, when Games Workshop supported things more, the gaming club, we would all go down to Games Day down in Baltimore. We would ride down to Baltimore, 6 or 7 guys in the car. And the crazy part was, all the cars I've always had, or we would drive, they're like 15-year-old wrecks, kind of just barely hanging on. And people you wouldn't understand that the miniatures, forget the passengers in the car, the miniatures that we have that we would bring down to Games Day, because we bring like 2 or 3 armies to play, they're worth more than the car. They're worth more than anything. And when we park the car and maybe go get something to eat, it's like, hey, you're staying with the car. We have $20,000 worth of miniatures in these cars. It's crazy. But we would go to Games Day. And then after Games Day, we would go to the Battle Bunker. And every year I would play at the Battle Bunker. We'd play one game, an amazing 40K player, Bishop, and myself. And we're talking like 10 years ago, where for like 3 or 4 years, we would play a game. And he would always beat me. And I'd be like, okay, next year, I'm going to come back and I'm going to beat him. I mean, we would play it other times, but this was like a standing tradition. And we wouldn't tell each other what army we're bringing. So I'd be like, Bishop is going to bring his Eldar. So I'm going to play Necrons. And then he'd have his Necrons and I'd have my Necrons, or various back and forth. But I illustrate that to say I can literally close my eyes right now because it was the perfect setting. We're in the Battle Bunker, amazing terrain, amazing armies, an amazing 40K player. And Bishop wanted to create that memory with me. We wanted to create something. So I can look back and literally remember turn by turn the exciting points of those games as if they happened yesterday in my mind. For me, that's what 40K is about. That is what I want to do on the table. So I bring these narrative armies where I'm trying to make something happen, but you don't want to get curb stomped. You don't want to get crushed. And the fact that Marines are always going to get the love means this, and this is how this is what you have to approach before anything else. And we'll go through a couple of army lists. I'm going to make some notes, and we'll look at those following. You need to gear your army up, whatever faction you're going to play, whatever army you're going to play, to kill Space Marines. To kill Space Marines. And to kill the maximum amount of Space Marines a turn. You need to be able to look and say, based on the units in your book, we're not talking about necessarily units that you've purchased yet, based on the units in your book at the different levels, sizes of games that you might play, modified by mission a little bit. Realistically, taking the swing of dice, how many Marines can you kill a turn? On a side note, we've talked about this idea of dice pools, where you start out with a unit and you're shooting, and the dice, you literally have a pool of dice. How many dice do you have? Then you see if you hit. The dice become less because they're misses. Then how many wounds do you put? And the dice pools go down and down and down, saves, multi-wound, things like that, until finally there's a smaller amount of models that get killed compared to the number of dice or wounds placed that you were rolling. So you need to look in your book. You need to look at your faction. You need to look at your army and literally say, what is optimized for killing Space Marines? And build that as a backbone of your army. You have to focus on killing Space Marines. That's it. Now, Space Marines are more powerful than Xenos. So if you happen to play Xenos versus Xenos, I bring my Eldar and you bring your orcs. Well, I'm already kind of ahead of the game because if I can easily and quickly remove Space Marines, I'm going to be able to remove your orcs. This is the starting place. This is the starting place, because otherwise you're going to get curb stomped and you're trying to do a narrative game and you're going to get really depressed from that perspective. We just have to accept it. Marines are always going to be supported by Games Workshop. Now, once you have, because remember, this is different than your models. We're just looking open book, literally. Once you have the meta of what in the rules is able to remove Space Marines the most, and there is going to be a difference between the different armies. I mean, Necrons are getting a little more love right now. Chaos is like on the back burner as always. Tyranids are kind of at a unique place. There's going to be different aspects, different level of killy against Marines. Once you have that meta, once you have that purely on paper, now you begin to look and say, what miniatures do I have to match? Or if you're starting a new army or you're looking to incorporate miniatures, what miniatures in that list do I like to play? And you're going to narrow it down. The second aspect in looking to kill Marines, to optimize to kill Marines, like, yes, you have to play the mission. Yes, you have to have, depending on the mission, ways of scoring and earning, right? You're always out there earning on the tabletop. But your focus, number one, I mean, always play mission, but your focus number one is, how am I going to kill Marines? How am I going to kill Marines? How am I going to just remove buckets and buckets of Marines every turn? Then you want to look at your units and ask yourself, based on the meta, what things like bypass the rules, bypass different phases of the game. So, in the movement phase, you can jump around or you can suddenly appear, or have a special pop-off that causes, D number of wounds from that, or, back in the day, massive area effects, or just ways to not have to roll in certain segments of the game and cause wounds. That aspect of bypassing the core phases, you can select from them to add the boosting to the kill of the Marines. But generating the most amount of dice and looking to kill Marines, then you make a concession. Then at least going in. And you're able to decide. A perfect example was, at the time, number of years ago, I think this was in 5th, maybe moving into 6th, Harlequins were rolled into the Eldar book. And they were really just meant to play one unit, to have a little spice, get a little spicy on the table. And I wanted to do an all-space clown army. I wanted to do all clowns because 40K is serious business, and somehow having a killer clown army. And I wanted to go on the tournament scene with it because, nobody else was playing a Harlequin, 100% Harlequin army. I mean, you could do it back then, but it was crazy because it was not its own faction. It's just there in the book. I knew going in that it was like the old school Lost in the Damned unit in 40K, where you could take it as a Marine player, but it was never meant to be the backbone of your army. It was meant to be like you buy some cool models and roll it out every now and then. Sometimes, I say this because sometimes you might be looking to build a very themed army that just doesn't have the killy. And if that's the case, if it cannot be optimally geared up to kill Space Marines, you're going to be at a tremendous disadvantage. it's going to be hard to pull out a win. Will you be okay with that? And you might be okay with that. That depends on your personal play style, but at least you know going in that you could focus on that and you can play on that. One final example was back in the day, we used to play a lot of Apocalypse at the club because you'd have imagine showing up for a Saturday and 10 tables full of terrain, city terrain, ruins terrain, connected. And, you've got 30 players on each side, each with all their model collections. I would build my Eldar lists, my Samhan lists, just for speed. They had 0 killie, they had nothing, just massive, massive, massive speed and web portals. So by turn 2, I could be anywhere on the table, going through a portal, zipping in the backfield. My job was just to zoom around the table, the backfield where all the super heavies were, and death strike missiles and all this other crazy stuff, and get them to try and shoot at me as opposed to everybody else on the other side of the table. I wasn't able to really kill anything, but I had a blast just zipping around, kind of laughing at everybody as we played. It was a lot of fun. I knew that going in. I knew that okay, I'll take some shots, but I'm not going to do much. And every turn I'm going to lose models, but I'm contributing to the game in that capacity, in this bigger mega game. So sometimes when you build a list, if you're having fun with it or if it's a theme, you have to know that going in. If you try to be competitive or you're new to 40K and you're I'm going to go play Space Marines, if it's not optimized, and that's just the way it is, I'm not making a judgment on it, but if you know that, you can build it. And likewise, if you're a Space Marine player, you got to gear up to kill Space Marines. Same thing, but now you'll have a much easier time at the apex with that meta, being able to do that because the number of units that are at your disposal and that you have, very, very potent, very, very powerful.